The champagne glass slipped from my fingers. The sound of crystal shattering against marble should have been loud enough to stop every conversation in that pristine living room, but somehow my best friend's voice carried over everything else. Oh, and the funniest part? Maya actually thought she could be a real writer. She's been working on this pathetic little novel for 3 years now, sending it to publishers who won't even respond to her emails. Laughter erupted around Sarah, like she was the star of her own comedy show. 20 pairs of eyes found me standing frozen by the champagne table, my face burning hot enough to melt the ice sculptures decorating the room. 3 years of friendship. 3 years of sharing dreams, fears, and secrets over late-night coffee runs and weekend writing sessions. 3 years of trusting someone with the most vulnerable parts of my soul. Sarah's perfectly manicured hand gestured toward me with theatrical flair. She actually thinks she's going to get published. Can you imagine? Maya Chen, best-selling author. The way she said my name made it sound like a punchline. The worst part wasn't the laughter. It was the pity in some of their faces. These people I barely knew, industry professionals Sarah had promised would be interested in my work, now looking at me like a child who still believed in fairy tales. My manuscript, the one I'd poured everything into, the one Sarah had read chapter by chapter, offering encouragement and notes, pretending to care about every word. She knew exactly how much those rejections hurt. She'd held me while I cried over form letters that started with "unfortunately" and ended with "not the right fit." The rejections are honestly hilarious, Sarah continued, warming to her audience. She saves every single one in a folder like their love letters, almost 200 of them now. My legs felt like water. Someone behind me whispered something about delusions of grandeur. Another voice mentioned something about participation trophies for everyone these days. Sarah caught my eye across the room and had the audacity to wink, like we were sharing an inside joke instead of her systematically destroying every dream I'd ever shared with her. The party moved on around my humiliation. Conversations shifted to safer topics while I stood there with champagne soaking into my dress and glass fragments scattered at my feet like the pieces of trust Sarah had just shattered. I left without saying goodbye. The elevator ride down from Sarah's penthouse apartment felt like descending into my own personal hell. 37 floors of replaying every cruel word, every laugh, every pitying glance. The parking garage was cold and empty. Perfect setting for the death of a friendship. My phone buzzed with texts I didn't want to read, Sarah, probably, pretending to apologize or making sure I was okay with her little performance. The same way she checked on me after every previous betrayal disguised as concern. Because this wasn't the first time, I just hadn't wanted to see the pattern before tonight. There was the time she told my crush about my embarrassing poetry phase. The time she shared my therapy stories at a dinner party because they made for great conversation starters. The time she accidentally forwarded my vent text about our mutual friend to that exact friend. Always an accident, always followed by tears and apologies and promises that it would never happen again. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt calculated, deliberate, like she'd been planning exactly which secrets to weaponize for maximum damage. The drive home passed in a blur of streetlights and stop signs. My apartment felt smaller when I walked in, like the walls had moved closer together while I was gone. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt safe anymore. My laptop sat open on the kitchen table where I'd left it, cursor blinking patiently in my latest chapter. The word count in the corner read 67, 432. 3 years of early mornings and late nights condensed into a number that Sarah had made sound pathetic. I closed the laptop harder than necessary. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Every time I drifted off, I heard Sarah's voice echoing through my dreams, turning my most private moments into entertainment for strangers. Morning brought coffee and the familiar weight of starting over, but something had shifted during those sleepless hours. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh, but underneath it lived something harder. Something cold. Anger had crystallized into purpose. I opened my laptop and stared at that blinking cursor for a long time. Then I started typing, but not on my novel. This was something new, something different. A story about friendship and betrayal. About trust broken and secrets weaponized. About a woman who thought she could destroy someone else's dreams without consequences. The words flowed like they never had before, raw and honest and sharp enough to cut. I wrote about the way betrayal feels like drowning in air, about the specific cruelty of watching someone you love turn your vulnerabilities into their entertainment. But I also wrote about revenge, the quiet, patient kind that waits for the perfect moment to strike. By noon, I had 15 pages. By evening, 30. The story poured out of me like an infection finally finding release. Sarah called twice, texted 6 times. I let them all go unanswered. The weekend disappeared into a haze of caffeine and righteous fury. I wrote until my fingers cramped and my eyes burned. I wrote until the hurt transformed into something sharper, more useful. Monday morning brought clarity and a plan that made my lips curve into something that barely qualified as a smile. I'd been approaching my novel all wrong. Too polite, too careful, too concerned with what people might think. But this new story? This story had teeth. The publishing industry loves authenticity, raw truth, stories that make people uncomfortable because they recognize themselves in the worst characters. So I gave them exactly that. The new manuscript was finished in 3 weeks, 27 days of channeling every ounce of betrayal into something saleable. Every cruel laugh, every pitying glance, every secret Sarah had turned into ammunition. I called it Best Friends Forever. The story of Zara Mason, a wannabe influencer who destroys her best friend's dreams at a party full of industry professionals, not knowing that her friend has been secretly documenting every betrayal for years. The best part? Zara was so perfectly, recognizably Sarah that anyone who knew us both would see it immediately. The mannerisms, the speech patterns, the specific brand of cruelty disguised as concern. But legally, it was fiction. Creative interpretation, artistic license. I spent a week crafting the perfect query letter. No more desperate pleading or apologetic explanations. This time, I led with confidence, with the kind of hook that makes agents lean forward in their chairs. What happens when your best friend becomes your worst enemy in front of the people who could make or break your career? Best Friends Forever is a 72-0-word psychological thriller about friendship, betrayal, and the devastating power of secrets turned weapons. The first response came back in 6 hours, a full request. The second came the next day, then another, then 3 more in the same week. Within 2 weeks, I had 5 agents fighting over representation. Within a month, I had a book deal with a major publisher and an advance that made my hands shake when I saw the number. Sarah tried to reach out during those weeks, probably sensed something had shifted, though she couldn't have imagined what. The texts grew more frequent, more desperate. Lunch invitations and coffee dates and casual suggestions that we should catch up soon. I ignored them all. The really beautiful part came 6 months later, when advance reader copies started circulating. When early reviews began appearing online, praising the devastatingly accurate portrayal of toxic friendship, and the unflinching examination of how people we trust can become our worst enemies. That's when Sarah finally understood. The first text arrived at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. All caps, accusations and threats and demands that I explain myself. How could I do this to her? How could I be so cruel? How could I expose her private business to the entire world? The irony was rich enough to choke on. I screenshot every message before blocking her number. The book launched 3 months later to reviews that made my chest tight with vindication. Publishers Weekly called it a stunning debut that exposes the darkest corners of female friendship with surgical precision. Kirkus described it as unflinching and brutally honest. But the review that mattered most came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Morrison, the literary agent who'd been at Sarah's party that night, wrote a piece for the Writer's Digest about recognizing authentic voices in submission piles. She mentioned my book specifically, noting how the author's personal experience with friendship betrayal elevated the narrative beyond typical revenge fiction into something genuinely literary. She remembered me, the girl with champagne on her dress and glass at her feet, the one everyone had pitied while Sarah performed her cruelty like dinner theater. The book hit the New York Times bestseller list in its fourth week. The publisher ordered a second printing. Foreign rights sold to 12 countries. A streaming service optioned the film rights. Sarah's LinkedIn profile changed 3 times during those months, each version trying to distance herself from any connection to the book or its author. But the internet never forgets, and screenshots live forever. Someone had recorded video of that night at her party. Just snippets, background footage from someone filming their outfit or the view from her penthouse. But clear enough to catch Sarah's voice, her exact words, her theatrical gestures as she tore apart my dreams for entertainment. The video surfaced on Book Talk with a caption, "When your friend's book becomes a bestseller and you realize you're the villain." It went viral in 12 hours. Sarah deleted all her social media accounts the next day. The author event started small. Local bookstores, library readings, book club discussions. But they grew as word spread about the story behind the story, about the real friendship that inspired the fiction. I never confirmed the connection directly. Didn't need to. The parallels were clear enough for anyone paying attention, but subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. Is this based on personal experience? Became the most common question at every event. My answer was always the same. The best fiction comes from emotional truth, even when the specific events are imagined. The lie felt different than Sarah's lies. Mine protected something instead of destroying it. 6 months after publication, I was signing books at a festival in Chicago when I looked up to see a familiar face in line. Not Sarah, but Jennifer Morrison, the agent from that disastrous party. She approached the table with a copy of my book and a smile that seemed genuinely warm. "I have to ask," she said, placing the book in front of me. "Did you always know you had this story in you?" The question caught me off guard. Everyone always wanted to know about Sarah, about the betrayal, about the revenge. No one asked about the writing itself. "I think it was always there," I said, pen hovering over the title page. "It just took the right catalyst to bring it out." "Pain often does that," she said. "Makes us braver than we thought we could be." I signed her copy with steady hands and genuine gratitude. This was the woman who'd witnessed my lowest moment and lived to see my highest. The success felt different than I'd expected. Sweeter, but also complicated. There was satisfaction in proving them all wrong, but underneath it lived something harder to define. A sadness for what had been lost along with what was gained. Late at night, when the excitement faded and the house grew quiet, I sometimes wondered what might have happened if Sarah had chosen differently that night. If she'd introduced me as a talented writer instead of a cautionary tale, if she'd supported my dreams instead of sacrificing them for cheap laughs. But those thoughts never lasted long. Some bridges burned completely, leaving nothing but scorched earth and the wisdom to build something better in their place. The second book deal came easier. Publishers were interested in my unique voice and authentic exploration of complex relationships. The advance was 3 times larger than the first. I wrote about forgiveness this time, the way it can heal the giver more than the receiver. The difference between forgiving someone and trusting them again. The peace that comes from letting go of anger not for their sake, but for your own. Sarah tried to contact me one more time, about a year after the book's release, a handwritten letter forwarded through my publisher. 4 pages of apologies and explanations, justifications and requests for forgiveness. She was sorry, she'd been jealous, she'd felt threatened by my dreams because her own had never materialized. She'd lashed out in a moment of weakness and regretted it every day since. The letter painted her as a victim of her own insecurities rather than the architect of deliberate cruelty. I read it twice, then filed it away with all the other documents from that chapter of my life, not because I was holding on to anger, but because some stories need their evidence preserved. Forgiveness, I'd learned, didn't require forgetting. And healing didn't require pretending the wound had never existed. 2 years later, I was moderating a panel on friendship in literature when someone in the audience asked about betrayal. How do writers balance honesty with harm when telling stories inspired by real relationships? The question hung in the air like incense, heavy and complicated. The truth is, I said, looking out at faces full of their own stories, their own secrets, their own betrayals, sometimes the people who hurt us give us the greatest gift of all. They show us exactly who we are when everything else is stripped away. The room was quiet except for the scratch of pens on notebooks and the soft click of phones recording every word. My best friend destroyed my dreams at a party 2 years ago, I continued. She turned my vulnerabilities into entertainment for strangers. She made me feel small and foolish and naive. Murmurs rippled through the audience. They knew this story, had read it, discussed it in book clubs and online forums. But she also gave me the fuel I needed to write the most honest thing I'd ever written. The anger taught me to write without apology. The betrayal taught me the difference between being nice and being authentic. A young woman in the third row raised her hand. Do you think she's read the book? The question I'd been waiting for. The one I'd practiced answering until it felt natural. I hope so. I said and meant it. I hope she recognized herself. I hope she understood that actions have consequences. And I hope she learned something about the power of other people's stories. Because that was the truth Sarah had forgotten that night at her party. Everyone has a story. Everyone is the protagonist of their own narrative. And some of us are brave enough to write it down and share it with the world. The signing line afterward stretched around the building. Readers with their own stories of friendship betrayal, of secrets weaponized, of trust broken and rebuilt stronger. They thanked me for giving voice to experiences they'd thought were uniquely theirs. A teenager near the end of the line handed me a book that was clearly well-loved, pages soft with multiple readings. This helped me understand what happened with my best friend. She said, I thought I was stupid for trusting her, but your book made me realize that trust isn't stupid. Betraying trust is. Those words stayed with me long after the event ended, long after I'd driven home to my quiet house and opened laptop to work on book number 3. Sarah had taught me more than she'd ever intended, not just about the anatomy of betrayal, but about resilience. About the alchemy that transforms pain into purpose, wounds into wisdom. She'd tried to make me smaller that night, but instead she'd shown me exactly how large I could become. The cursor blinked patiently on my screen, waiting for the next story, and I had so many stories left to tell. Stories about redemption and revenge, about friendship and forgiveness, about the way people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. Stories that would outlive the pain that inspired them. Stories that would help other people feel less alone in their own betrayals, their own healing, their own transformations. I smiled as I began to type. Sarah had given me the perfect ending after all.